Joining me now to discuss his latest FoxNews.com piece entitled Biden's in Trouble, but here are 5 reasons Dems won't tap Gavin Newsom for a White House run is author, attorney, former California GOP chair, and U.S. Senate candidate Tom Del Beccaro. Tom, thank you so much for joining me today.
Good to see you again. Thank you.
So let's talk about this. Everyone's looking for another person because Biden really is halting and freezing up in his appearances. Most recently, with Barack Obama having to lead him off of the stage, he looked very disoriented. But you don't think it'll be Gavin Newsom? Why not?
Well, the first part, when James Carville says out loud, I never wanted this guy, and of course, Axelrod's been pushing it. So it's not just the right that's making this claim. The Democrats, their big consultants, are talking about it openly. So they want to look to someone else. And as you well know, the Democrat bench for years has been rather thin. It's not at all like the Republican bench. And a year ago, or slightly more, I'm from California, Gavin Newsom was astride the national stage. He was attacking Republicans. He was very active in bringing attention to himself. And then suddenly he disappeared. And that's what I wanted to talk about in this piece, because he had that big debate with DeSantis, and he disappeared ever since then. And there's two things about that. One, I thought his debate performance was terrible. He didn't come off as likable. That's your number one job in a debate, make people like me. And of course, that was his first ever national appearance for an extended period of time, not just a news clip. And his wife actually had to drag him off the stage. If you remember, Sean Hannity said, will you stay? And he said yes. And then next thing you know, he was gone. He didn't come off likable. And then the very next week, and they had known this information before, they released the budget deficit of California, and it was $68 billion at the time. And ever since then, there's been this cavalcade of bad news about California, worse than normal. And those are the two main points. We can go into it in a little bit more depth. But Gavin Newsom currently, since I put this piece out, is the least liked governor in the United States in the polls.
I saw Doug Burgum, I think it was, or it might have been another senator. It was a governor. He was talking on a podcast or some kind of presentation where it was rebroadcast onto YouTube, and he was saying that there are only two governors out of all of them that are universally disliked, and he said one of them's Gavin Newsom. He doesn't get along well with others. And the Governors Association, we think of them as being at odds with each other because they're Democrats or Republicans. But the fact is, they're all governors of states. They're in a rarefied group where there are only 50 of them in the entire country. And there's always only 50. There always only ever will be 50. So they have a very collegial atmosphere amongst themselves when they're talking about issues that they're tackling in their states. And it also makes it possible for them to share ideas. And so he was talking about that. And I was kind of going through all that in my mind. And then I was like, wait a second, you're saying none of the governors like him. Well, that's key, because governors can help you to get inroads into their state for campaigning and for funding, for donations. And Gavin doesn't have that collegiality with the other governors.
Yeah, you bring up an excellent point. So I know people that have known Gavin since high school. And he was this way in high school. He had big plans for himself, but he was aloof and arrogant even in high school. And as he's worked his way through the system, now look, he got as far as he had because the Getty family probably has a few more dollars than you and I will ever have. And the Pelosi family eventually, and even the Brown family, which he married into the Pelosi family, and he got benefits. And, you know, the Sacramento Bee once wrote a story about this is the definition of white privilege, Gavin Newsom. And it was a Democrat who wrote it. So it was sort of this interesting dynamic. And he's never really been liked, even in his own legislature. When COVID started, he took upon himself all these powers and didn't talk to Democrats. And they were openly angry about it. So you add all these things up, and it turns out he's not that good a candidate. His policies don't work well. You just brought up a great point I should have included in my article about how weak he is also with governors. But he just isn't likable, and people like to like the person for whom they vote.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that. In fact, I would say the unlikability extends beyond that. I actually thought to myself, I just don't like him because he's ruining California. So I'm going to go on to YouTube and I'm going to find a bunch of videos of him doing interviews because I'm going to see some of his personality that'll give me a better kind of perspective on him. Because it's not that I'm being unfair, my opinion is my opinion, but maybe there's something about him that's likable because, admit it or not, and a lot of Republicans won't, but Barack Obama is likable. He's funny, he's witty, he's got a wry sense of humor. He's got a little bit of a vicious edge to his personality, which always makes people more interesting. You might not like that, but it does make you more interesting if you're unafraid to show the vicious side of your personality. And he's a family man. He loves his wife and his daughters. And so I found lots of things about Barack Obama. Policy stinks. I hate his worldview. Can't stand any of that stuff. But as a person, if I bumped into him with my husband, I don't know about Michelle because I don't know that she and I would click, but he seems like someone if you struck up a conversation with him at the grocery store, you'd walk away laughing and maybe go look up a website afterwards. Gavin Newsom is not like that. Every video I watched in the interviews, he drops curse words and expletives on national media with California stories. If he's on a podcast, that's unusual for people outside of Donald Trump who isn't a politician. It's also unusual for people who are having national political aspirations or who are on a likability tour, which is what he was on. When you ask Gavin Newsom a question about something he's done that didn't work out, he immediately goes bad, like he turns like bad milk, and he never comes back. He doesn't laugh, he doesn't save it, he doesn't try to rescue it. He just stays in that vein for the whole thing. He's a spoiled brat. And I couldn't find anything to like. I watched about 10 videos, nothing to like there.
Yeah, you're 100% right. If you look in the television age, the candidate who is more likable, I say People magazine can predict the presidency better than the polls. The likable person, like Kennedy came off more likable than Nixon. Remember Al Gore when the makeup and he couldn't decide what to wear, and everyday guy Bush Jr. won, and then Clinton was more likable than the dad and more likable than Dole. That's a big deal with people. Look, Pluto complained. Not Pluto. You have this complaint about this forever, right? And so this is not new to history. And what you have in this regard is another candidate who just isn't that likable.
Yeah, but there's more to it than that. California's experimentation under Gavin Newsom is actually failed. And I think a lot of Americans don't really look at other states and say that's a failed state. They say, I can't afford to live there, right? So it's a much more practical calculus. But for policy wonks and talking heads on TV, pardon me, we know that it's more than that. We actually know that he has done things to the state of California since he's been there. First of all, he's made promises. He promised to eradicate homelessness. They've spent $20 billion on it. There's more of it than there was when he came in. He's also talked about the budget, how he's better for California. They had a surplus when he came in. Now they have a huge deficit. I mean, if you look at every metric of how a state is doing, inflows and outflows, U-Haul, the company, had to reallocate their shipping lines on trucks because so many of their trucks 100%. Were leaving California. They didn't have any going back in, and those are moving trucks. That's an indicator that they have an outflow of population. They've had significant population loss, which they've replaced through illegal immigration. So, I mean, you could go on and on and on and on, but most Americans don't talk about it like that. I wonder if they've had that same conversation and that's why they're not picking him, or if they're going to have to pick him because he's the only one. It's him or Hakeem Jeffries.
Yeah, you make a good point. I obviously was referring to Plato earlier. He talked about we pick our people on looks and personality. I wouldn't pick my doctor based on looks and personality, and that's what they're doing. No, I think what you're right about Newsom, the likability. Then you go to his policies, and then you go to the fact that he doesn't work well with that. You just keep going on and on and on, and this is the drop off. But look, here's one thing people need to remember. They're having a very late convention. It's in August. And North Carolina, I believe, is one of the first states where absentee ballots have to go out 13 days after, or mail-in ballots, 13 days after the convention. Ohio had to change their laws because their laws were before their convention about who had to be on the ballot. So they don't even really have the physical capacity to do this. If they brought someone else in at the convention, a bunch of states would have to rewrite their laws and scramble. So they're still doing these huge fundraisers for Biden. The money's going there. And I just think it's too little too late. They won't have a choice, and they're going to have to stick with this guy. And that's where they are. And even though they wanted someone else, it's that thin bench. I mean, think about it. Hakeem Jeffries, when you take that position, you tend to be very polarizing in the end. You can't think of the last Speaker of the House that came out of it loved by both sides, right? It doesn't happen anymore. And so Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, they don't have a popular young governor. And that's the other thing. Obama was young and telegenic. McCain was much older, and as you pointed out, he's kind of stodgy, right, compared to Obama. They don't have a young, likable governor. I thought Amy Klobuchar was their most likable person around. Pete Buttigieg for a short period of time, but he's failed.
No, not Pete Buttigieg. You know what, Tom? It's Kirsten Sinema. She would have been their person, or Tulsi Gabbard. Either one of them could have filled the role, but they alienated both of those women out of the party. Tom Del Beccaro, author, attorney, former GOP chair for California, and U.S. Senate candidate. Great messaging here. I love it. Talk to you again soon here on the show.
All right. Take care.
All right. And we have coming up after this next S&C Fast Break. After 50 years, Saudi Arabia breaks up with the United States. That's us. And ends the petrodollar. I'll tell you why that's important and why no one's reporting on it after this.